Everyone, and welcome to Congressman Adam Smith's Telephone Town Hall. During this event, we'll be taking questions from constituents like you. To ask a question, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad. You can also sign up for Congressman Smith's newsletter by pressing star 6 at any time during this call. Again, press star 3 to ask a question and star 6 to subscribe to our newsletter. And with that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Smith. Congressman, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to do these telephone town halls. I think it's a good way to stay in touch. There is a lot going on. I will not be able to cover it all. I want to save as much time as possible for your questions, comments, and any issues you want to raise. Also, always want to emphasize, this is one way of staying in touch with me in my office, not the only way. Please feel free to call, email, text, however you want to get in touch with us to make sure that we are staying in touch, hearing your concerns and addressing them as best as we can. So the biggest thing, obviously, last week, Congress passed the budget bill, a multi-trillion-dollar effort at spending over the course of the next 10 years, spending and tax policy. I am deeply concerned about what was in that bill. Mostly, it raises the debt by about $3.4 trillion. You've heard that there are spending cuts and there are also tax cuts in there. The tax cuts start immediately and are phased out. The spending cuts are phased in a couple of years. So in the short term, there may well be a sort of sugar boost to our economy by just spending a lot of money. But in the long term, the debt is going to go up, and I am worried about that. But also those spending cuts that were included hit, I think, the wrong places. They are cuts to access to healthcare, cuts to access to food, access to education, a lot of basic programs that are really important for people. I think the easiest way to think about it is we have a major problem of concentration of wealth in our country. We're generating a lot of wealth, but opportunity and equality are not really being achieved for a lot of people. And this bill goes in the opposite direction. Roughly, if you're in the top 20% of earners, you will benefit from this bill through tax cuts. If you are in the bottom 60 to 80%, those tax cuts will not benefit you, and you will likely suffer because you will have less access to healthcare and food and other vital programs. So that is my biggest concern about how this bill plays out. Drives up the debt while cutting programs that are really crucial for people who are struggling. To make sure that we can create more opportunity for people in this country. So that's done. The president has signed it. We do still have the appropriations fight this year. They're, the yearly appropriations for FY26. And there are a lot of programmatic cuts in there around veterans programs, scientific research, things like NOAA, NIH, the CDC. Yes, it is a problem to be cutting our weather forecasters and other folks at NOAA. And a lot of those cuts are coming in. And housing programs, I met with a couple groups yesterday talking about access to affordable housing. A lot of programs are going to be cut there. So we still have to fight that out in the next several months. But this 10-year budget reconciliation bill is in place, and I think will have a negative effect. One final aspect of that, which pivots me into a discussion of immigration policy. The bill does spend more money in some areas. It added $150 billion to our defense spending, but it also added over $100 billion to, broadly speaking, border security and immigration enforcement. Just to put that into perspective, ICE, who are the people who are responsible for immigration enforcement, their typical yearly budget is around, 9 to 15 billion. We just threw another $100 billion at their efforts in terms of building more detention facilities and beefing up enforcement. That is troubling. It's troubling because I believe in border security, but what we've seen, ICE agents are engaging in far more than that. We've seen raids. They're masked, unidentified, pulling people off the streets without due process, frequently deporting them without due process. The easiest way I can sum up what I think immigration policy should be is we should have a secure border. And I will readily acknowledge that the previous administration did not do enough to secure the border. We cannot grant asylum to absolutely everybody who seeks it. There needs to be some rules. We need to enforce immigration laws. Second, people who are in this country undocumented, who are committing crimes, should be deported. I agree with that. But the third thing, and this is where I think this bill and the Trump administration's approach is so problematic, we have roughly 10 to 15 million people in this country undocumented. We are incredibly dependent upon those people for a number of different jobs, and they are law-abiding. They are paying taxes, active members of our community. This new money is only going to go to taking those people off the streets and deporting them, and I don't think that's good policy. So I'm deeply concerned about all the money that is being pumped into detention and immigration enforcement. I think the Trump administration is using ICE and in some cases the military for domestic law enforcement in a way that is troubling. It gives the federal government entirely too much power over our lives without sufficient checks and balances. And remember, they're not just picking up people who are undocumented. They're picking up people who have green cards, who are legal permanent residents, and in some cases, even people who are naturalized citizens. So it is a broad swath, and I'm worried about it. Third big issue is tariffs. President Trump put a 90-day pause on most of his tariffs. That 90-day pause expired today, as a matter of fact. We've seen him dive back in, put a 50% tariff on Brazil today, supposedly because he thinks Brazil is unfairly persecuting Bolsonaro, former president of Brazil. I don't think that's how we should be setting economic policy. He's also, continued very high tariffs on steel and aluminum and automobiles. And it sounds like we're going to continue sort of a chaotic, sporadic tariff policy that I am worried about how that is going to impact our economy. Tariffs can be an incredibly important part of economic policy. I do not oppose them, but I oppose implementing them in a haphazard, chaotic manner that is undermining our economy. So happy to talk more about that if you have questions. Lastly, a couple things on foreign policy. Been a lot in the news recently about Ukraine. Whether or not the U.S. is going to cut off our support for Ukraine. I want to be clear, I support continuing to help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian invasion. I do not want U.S. troops involved. I do not want the U.S. or NATO directly in conflict with Russia, but Ukraine deserves our help in their effort to survive this invasion. And they have been having a remarkable amount of success. Given the odds that they were given at the start of this conflict. They have proven to be incredibly courageous, tenacious, and resilient. And we have helped put together a 53-nation coalition that helps arm them to defend themselves. I think this is the path to ending the war. Putin won't stop if he thinks he can take all of Ukraine. And we've seen that. Ever since Trump got into office and started blaming Ukraine for the war, attacking Zelensky, and taking all of the pressure off of Putin, Putin has ramped up his attacks. So I think we should continue to support Ukraine. It sounds like the president may be coming around to that viewpoint, but it's hard to say. So there's that. And then lastly, I think it was a huge mistake to bomb Iran. I think it risked a direct conflict with Iran. Knock on wood, at the moment, that conflict seems to be managed. But also, it did not eliminate the problem. Iran still has a nuclear program. Even the most optimistic assessments of the attacks that Israel and we did on Iran say that it delayed their program by 18 months to 2 years. So they still have a program. We still need diplomacy to end it. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to your questions and comments in terms of getting to peace in the Middle East, President Trump's talking, a lot. Well, he wants the Nobel Prize for having stopped a war that started during his administration between Israel and Iran and lasted 12 days. The conflict has not been resolved. Iran and Israel exchanged missiles twice during the Biden administration. Those wars stopped too. The conflict has not yet been resolved. We need to find a resolution to it. We will not find a resolution to the conflict in the Middle East until we end the war in Gaza and develop some sort of future for the Palestinian people going forward. That needs to be part of these negotiations. I know that there are discussions now about a ceasefire in Gaza. We need a permanent ceasefire. And just dropping a few bombs on Iran certainly didn't accomplish that. And I also believe that it was unlawful because the U.S. did not face any kind of imminent threat from Iran when that decision was made. So, like I said, a lot of ground. I covered some of it, a lot more to cover, a lot more issues. There's a lot of local issues. I'm still working on workforce development, education, policy, and affordable housing. Number one biggest problem we have around here, we don't have enough housing. We need to build more and we need to bring down the cost. So, working on those issues, got some bills there as well. But like I said, I want to get to you. So I will stop, take your questions and comments.
As a quick reminder to ask Congressman Smith a question, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad. To sign up to receive our newsletter, press star 6 at any time during this call. And let's get to the phones. We've got Kathy in Auburn joining us. Kathy, you are live with Congressman Smith. What's on your mind?
My concern is about the thuggish tactics used by ICE and the fact that they don't have to identify themselves and are doing everything they can to deny due process and sending people to third countries where they have no ties. And I was wondering what the congressman would propose to put a stop to those tactics.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is an incredibly dangerous and a misuse of ICE and the immigration law enforcement. President Trump is using ICE all over the place. You saw them storming a children's soccer field down in Los Angeles. I think it was yesterday. It might have been 2 days ago. And this sort of heavy-handed tactics from the government violates people's rights. As you said, they're taking people off the streets without due process. And, yes, if you have, criminals who are here undocumented, certainly that should be dealt with. But that's not what they're doing. As you said, unidentified. It's dangerous. I mean, there was a raid in White Center that Danny Westneat wrote about, I think, today, where they showed up and, went into, I think it was a pawn shop. And who knows if they're being robbed? You easily could have had an exchange of gunfire and a dangerous situation created. They should not be wearing masks and they should be identifying themselves as what we can do about it. We can speak out publicly against it and build support, because you've seen President Trump back off now. Well, he goes back and forth. Sometimes he says he's not going to, do immigration raids and agriculture and in the hotel industry and elsewhere, and then he flips back and forth. But if public pressure is applied, I think you can see Republicans change their mind. Because yes, people want border security. They do not want a police force coming down on them from the federal government that violates their individual rights. We're seeing that in community after community. We're going to speak out against it. We're trying to offer legislation to change the law and stop them from doing this. The Republicans in Congress have thus far been unresponsive, but it is an issue I think we need to speak about publicly and aggressively, because I think there is wide support, even outside of people who don't support Trump in general, the idea that this is wrong and not what our federal government should be doing.
All right, moving on to our next question. We've got Courtney in Seattle joining us. Hi, Courtney. You are live with the congressman. Go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, good evening, Congressman Smith. I supported your decision. It didn't come out to be acted on, that we do not bomb Iran. I thought it was a foolish move. But so far it seems that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu feel that there is now peace between Iran and Israel. At the moment, Netanyahu is in the White House, and I was hoping that we could now put pressure on Netanyahu to have a total end to the war in Gaza. I have petitioned you in other occasions to demand that the humanitarian aid organizations that have always served Gaza be allowed to re-enter. Organizations like Cindy McCain and the World Food Bank, Tom Fletcher, USAID, Jose Andres, World Central Kitchen. These have, for decades, brought humanitarian aid in trucks to the desperate people in Gaza. 4 months ago, Israel banned all humanitarian aid, food, water, and medicine into Gaza. And 4 weeks ago, they installed their own organization called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has been called murder disguised as humanitarian aid, because in 4 weeks, Palestinians lining up for food have been shot and killed, over 600, by these paid mercenaries and contractors, which are Israeli and U.S.
If I might,
people.
because I
And so, yes, I know it's a big problem, but this would be my request, is if we could put pressure for the humanitarian organizations to re-enter Gaza. Hamas has said if there's a
got
total
it.
ceasefire, all of the hostages will be returned.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. Yes, and I have and will continue to put pressure on Israel and on our government to advocate for getting all of those humanitarian groups. I have sent letters, I've signed on to letters, I've spoken out publicly about it. The humanitarian assistance situation in Gaza is an enormous crisis and tragedy. And those aid groups that you just mentioned should be allowed in. I do not support the approach that Israel is taking. I think it's a little bit inaccurate to say they're simply opening fire and people coming up to food. What they've done is they've created a chaotic situation where people coming up to get food mix in with other people who don't know where to go. And so they appear to be threatening, whether they are or not. But Israel's decision to block humanitarian aid and set up this other organization absolutely created the atmosphere that led to that violence. They need to let those aid groups back in, and we need to get a permanent ceasefire. Now, I think Hamas has been blocking this as much as Israel has been blocking it for the last, what are we up to now, 18, 19 months. So, it's certainly Hamas has played a huge role in this, but now is the time. And I think one of the things I'm really worried about is that Trump and Netanyahu are taking a victory lap. And this isn't over. It's not even over between Israel and Iran, for that matter. There is still a conflict. There is still a nuclear weapon. It certainly isn't over in Gaza. The other thing that we need to do that I have advocated for is to allow the neighboring Arab countries, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, who are working with Palestinians, who are an alternative to Hamas, to do that, to bring in this alternative. And Israel has blocked that in far too many instances. We have to have some alternative in Palestinian leadership to Hamas. And I think that is being developed. We need to give those people a chance. So we need to stop the war and allow this alternative to come in and try to govern both in the West Bank and Gaza. So I agree with your assessment of where this is at. And hopefully, if Trump wants to take a victory lap, do the work, get us peace in Gaza.
If you've joined us on the phone and you've got a question you'd like to ask your congressman, please press *3 to enter the question queue. Again, if you've got a question on your mind, please press *3 to ask it live on this call. And we're going to Renton now, where we've got David joining us on the line. David, welcome to the call. You are live. What's your question?
My question is that Medicare is in tough shape at the moment, and we need to work to solve that problem. And an easy way to solve that problem is to just drop the FICA cap.
Yeah, I agree. I'm co-sponsor of several different bills that would drop that cap, that would allow more revenue to come into Medicare and also to Social Security, by the way. It would help both of them. There are a couple of different bipartisan bills out there that would extend the life of Social Security by somewhere between 50 and 75 years, depending on the plan. We need to do that. I also am an aggressive advocate of healthcare reform. We need universal access to healthcare that will help bring down costs. And we need a whole lot of other reforms to try to make healthcare more cost effective. We still spend a lot of money on healthcare in this country. We don't get the results we should. We spend more money on healthcare per capita than any other country in the world. It's almost double the next highest country. We don't get the results. So I still support healthcare reform. One other aspect of the budget reconciliation bill that was just passed is it makes cuts to the Affordable Care Act. It will make it more difficult for people to get health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, which will only drive up the number of uninsured people in our country and drive up the cost for all of us. because uninsured people still get health care. They just struggle to pay for it. So healthcare providers increase costs for everybody else. That's part of the benefit that the Affordable Care Act brought by so, dramatically lowering the percentage of people who didn't have healthcare insurance in our country. So that too is a challenge. But to your central point, yes, I agree with you. We should scrap the cap so we can raise more revenue to help pay for Medicare and Social Security.
There's a very easy way to stay informed. You can right now press *6 on your telephone keypad and get signed up to receive the Congressman's informative newsletter. Again, please press *6 to get subscribed to the Congressman's newsletter. And we're back out to Renton again, and we've got Jason on the line with us. Hi, Jason. You are live with Congressman Smith. What's your question?
Hi, Congressman Smith. Question for you is on infrastructure in King County here. You're talking about the housing shortage. So my question for you is, what plans do you have coming along in future bills to increase the infrastructure in East King County, in particular in regards to sanitation, sewers, and all that stuff? If you don't have that, you really can't build very many houses. And secondly, there was at one time a lot of talk about creating I-705, which is basically connecting I-90 and then heading up north into Everett, heading up north over the Snoqualmie Tree Farm and into Monroe, Everett area there. Is there any plans? I mean, what are the plans? You're talking about fixing housing. Is there any plans along those lines for real infrastructure, or is it just more about building more multifamily homes, the big boxes you see going up around the county?
Yeah, well, it's a multifaceted approach. I mean, first of all, in your infrastructure plan, that's why I supported the bipartisan infrastructure bill that put over $1 trillion into precisely those types of infrastructure projects. That was something that was passed, 2022, I think, 2023, somewhere in there, that I think, will help fund all of that. So that is a piece of the larger problem, funding that infrastructure and getting us to where we need to be. And yes, we do also need to build more, multifamily housing units. More density needs to be included so that we can build more housing. And that's, the low-income housing tax credit is a huge part of that. There are a variety of different ways to fund that. In terms of the infrastructure we're building, I don't believe that the I-705 idea is seriously on the table right now. We did, as part of a number of transportation packages, there is down in Pierce County, the completion of Highway 167, to connect that down to the Port of Tacoma. And then in South King County, 509, they are going to connect 509 from where it used to stop in Berrien all the way down to connect with I-5 to help with that aspect of the infrastructure. They're also, as anyone around here will tell you, doing a massive amount of work on expanding and upgrading I-405. I drive that frequently. So there are a lot of infrastructure plans around that. But I'll tell you, when it comes to housing, the biggest thing we need to do is dramatically reform our permitting process to help drive down the cost of that housing. Private sector builders right now are pretty much fleeing our market because the cost of building just doesn't pencil out. So yeah, we are pumping some money into low-income housing, but if it's $1 million a unit to build, there's just not enough money to get there. So we've done some zoning reform. We need to do more zoning reform to encourage density, but we also need to change the permitting process that takes so long and is so cumbersome. Finally, the tariffs, not helping. Tariffs are driving up the prices for a lot of the aspects of building housing. I mean, tariffs on steel and aluminum, and that goes into building housing and also appliances and other things in the housing. And then tariffs on Mexico that drive up the cost of drywall, and tariffs on softwood lumber from Canada that drive up the cost of building materials. So we need a more sensible tariff policy, permitting reform, better zoning, and yes, more money for infrastructure. We've got quite a bit of money coming for infrastructure. We got to get more out of that money. We're not going to get out of this problem at $1 million a unit for housing. Also, I support affordable housing. I also support housing. If the more housing you build, the more supply you have, and the lower the cost will come. So it isn't just about building affordable housing. It's about making it more affordable to build housing in general. And all of those issues that I just laid out are getting us in trouble. And I have a federal bill that would encourage people to reduce permitting in state and local government, so that if you do that, you can get greater access to federal funds. I also have a bill that bans institutional investors from buying up single family homes, because I think
Nice.
that does drive up the cost, because you're now competing against these large hedge funds that can come in and do all cash, no inspection offers. But also they take the equity. You're no longer a homeowner, you're renting from a hedge fund. So the equity that was such a crucial part of the working class building some wealth would now go to hedge funds instead of the working families occupying the houses. So I'm pushing that. I think
in regards to that, in
Go ahead,
regards to
sorry.
that part, you just mentioned the bill there about the hedge fund companies, and I agree with everything you've been saying so far. In regards to the hedge fund companies buying up housing, it's been going on for quite a few years, and it's probably been going on for the last 40 years, but it never got this far out of control until the last, say, 4 or 5, 6 years. My question, and my last question for you is, how many of your other fellow 434 Congress members are really agree with that? Because to me, that is pretty unfair as an individual homeowner to compete against BlackRock as an example. I'd hope on both sides of the aisle, everybody agrees that's an unfair deal and can actually vote to keep that, put a clamp down on that stuff.
Yeah, I'm working at it, but I will tell you, BlackRock is very aggressive about pushing back on this. And it's funny, part of their argument is they're not really buying up that much housing, so it's not really a problem. Well, if they're not buying up that much housing, then why would they care if we stop them from doing it? And it is a big. It's not a huge problem in some places. It tends to be more in lower income areas and in states that have less restrictive building requirements. But it is a growing phenomenon. So there's pushback on it from them. And I've been on a number of different podcasts and interviews where I've pushed back against a number of these arguments. Right now, I don't have as much bipartisan support as I should for this, but we're pushing it and we're going to keep going after it. But right now, I don't have enough of the 434 of my colleagues supportive to get there.
It is great to see so many people are connected into this live telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. If you've got a question you'd like to ask, please press *3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. Next up, we're off to Federal Way. We've got Lola on the line with us. Hi, Lola. Welcome to the call. What's on your mind?
Well, on my mind is this big, beautiful bill that's just kind of messing everything up. And I was just wondering, is there any way we can fight this to claw back some of that money that's going to go to the border and put it into the various states so we can do something about the importance of our whole country?
Yeah,
that's my biggest problem. And then this 10-year deficit that we're going to be burdened with is another thing that I wondered if I guess we have to wait till we get back in power in order to get something done about this deficit. But right now, I'm wondering what we can do right away because I'm not sure when the bill takes effect.
Yeah, no, I think we can make that a central part of our argument. There are midterm elections coming up, and the cuts, as I mentioned, to Medicaid, SNAP, other programs, some of those cuts are delayed. And I think part of our argument should be the people who just voted for all these cuts, if you want to save us from them, you got to vote them out so we can go in there and change them. But the other part of the argument that we have to be willing to make, and I've had people say this to me, because, part of this was, Trump's promise, no tax on overtime, no tax on tips. And they put that into the bill, and that's alluring to a lot of people. But look, if we're going to cut all these taxes, we're not going to be able to fund things like Medicaid and food programs that are so important for people. And look, I support a progressive tax code. So we should, and we do, by the way, have marginal rates that are lower, and people get a big deduction. So if you're not making as much money, you don't have to pay as much taxes. But if you're going to cut taxes on overtime and tips, it's going to make it harder to pay for the programs that we need and add to the debt and the deficit. So I think we can aggressively argue that that's not a responsible way to budget. And also another problem with this is, tax attorneys are creative, and you're going to see a lot of things counted as overtime and tips now in terms of income that didn't used to be counted that way. So, and plus, you then have the Trump administration firing tens of thousands of IRS agents. So, we're not going to be able to collect the revenue we need to collect to fund our government. And it's a whole
Right.
bunch of issues. Certainly, it's healthcare. Certainly, it's food security, but it's also scientific research, NIH, CDC. We've got cancer trials and AIDS drugs that we're developing that are being cut off because we're cutting off that funding. And also, yes, it hurt that we didn't have more people working at NOAA and working at our weather forecasting to warn people about the flash floods that were coming to Texas. These are some of the basic things that our government does to protect us. And, you get rid of the tax on overtime, get rid of the tax on tips. But, now we don't really have a FEMA, so it can't
Right.
show up and help us. So I think we have to make the argument that we need to make better choices than were made in this budget bill.
Well, you're right. Thank you for your response on this.
Thank you for participating. I appreciate it.
Hmm.
All right, next up, we've got Christopher in Auburn on the line with us. Christopher, welcome. You are live with the Congressman. Go ahead now.
Hi, Congressman. I just want a quick question about the Trump administration. So during the Biden administration, the Justice Department went after his son, Hunter Biden, on trying to profit off his vice presidency. Why hasn't Congress, or more so the Republican Party, tried to go after the Trump family for trying to profit off his presidency?
Yeah, no, and the answer to that question is, and this is one of the big concerns I have about the Trump administration, and what I'm about to say is going to sound more partisan than I like to sound, but facts are facts. Trump is using the Justice Department as his own personal set of attorneys to settle personal and political grudges, to punish his political enemies and reward his political friends in a way that we have never seen in this country. It is a shocking undermining of our representative democracy and of the rule of law. He is pardoning all men. He pardoned all the January 6th people, even the ones who directly physically assaulted police officers. He cut a deal with Eric Adams and pardoned him as the mayor of New York. He pardoned this internet crypto guy who was literally selling drugs online, in order to get, sort of an exchange support for the crypto industry. He has used his pardoning and prosecutorial ability to, again, reward his friends and punish his enemies in a way that we have never seen before. And yes, Trump himself is the most corrupt president in the history of the country. He has made, I think, billions of dollars at this point, certainly hundreds of millions of dollars off of basically selling access to the White House. He developed a meme coin, and the people who invested the most in it got their own private dinner at the White House with the president. What world are we living in where that's okay? Even if you're the biggest MAGA supporter in the world, even if you think the far left is this plague and threat to humanity that only Donald Trump can protect us from, you should not be okay with the president of the United States raffling off access to the White House in exchange for people giving him hundreds of millions of dollars. Not to mention all of the deals that his family is getting overseas and in a bunch of different places. So that corruption we should focus on. But the answer to your question is that Trump is not even pretending that the Justice Department is about justice anymore. It is, he will use it for his own personal purposes to, again, punish his enemies and reward his friends in a way that should be shocking and appalling to everybody. Not to mention also the fact that he's filing all of these lawsuits against media companies and law firms that say or do things that he doesn't like, and then leveraging the Justice Department's power to force them into settlements. So, and look, I know people are concerned about kitchen table issues. They're concerned about, what's inflation going to be? They're concerned about border security. They're concerned about the economy and jobs and all that. But you ought to also be concerned about the health of our democracy and whether or not we have the rule of law, representative democracy, and the Constitution being upheld. And right now we do not. The president is doing a number of things that should trouble us all.
So if you have a question you'd like to ask Congressman Smith, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. Again, get involved in tonight's discussion. Please press star 3 if you have a question. Next, we're out to Renton, where we've got Art joining us. Hello, Art. You are live with Congressman Smith. Go ahead.
Hello, Congressman Smith. Thanks for taking my call. My question is kind of related to housing, but it has to do with mental illness. And I think mental illness is seriously taken for granted right now in this country and in the state of Washington. I'll give you an example. Currently, I live in a condo in the Renton Highlands, and my neighbor above me suffers from mental illness. Her mom bought her the condo, quickly and deeded it to her, and left her there. In the meantime, I have suffered massive water damages from her. I've had 8 or 9 floods, 2 floods on June 29th and 28th, and I'm about to go homeless. My place is destroyed. So I guess my question is, as far as when you're mentioning building housing and with the homelessness crisis, where will the mentally ill go? Will they be put in these homes where other homeowners are going to have to go through the same ordeal I am and then be told by the county and the state and the city that they can't remove these people? These people are allowed to do damages to other homeowners' properties, forcing them into homelessness, where their homes are being destroyed and they're losing their property value and their sanity, like I am. A lot of this damage from this water has been sewage water. And it's a clear health hazard. I've contacted the county, the state, APS, says they can't remove her, even though it's sewage, into my unit. And I've contacted the health department. They say it's a city issue. I've contacted the city of Renton, and I've gone before the city hall 3 times, and nothing's happened. Her unit has been condemned. She's allowed to keep.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
I got it, and I hear your frustration. First of all, I'd like to make sure my staff gets your contact information and follows up with you so that we can try to, sift our way through all of that bureaucracy and stop having people pointing fingers and saying, well, it's the city, it's the county, it's the housing authority, it's whatever. We should figure out how government can help you with the situation to the greatest extent possible. So let's make sure we do that just from a basic casework standpoint. Second of all, the 2 big points here on the mental health problem that you are specifically encountering. Number one, we have way too tough a time in this state, in my opinion, this is a controversial statement, with involuntary commitment. People who cannot take care of themselves, who are a danger to themselves or others, need to be committed and helped and treated in a safe environment where they are protected and they are not a threat to themselves or others. And we simply do not do that. We see that on the streets of not just Seattle, but South King County as well. We don't do that often enough. Second, we do have some what is called permanent supportive housing. They built, I think, 100 or so units over on the east side here in Bellevue a little while back, which sets up so that you have mental health counselors in the building who can help. Maybe people who aren't so far, in trouble from mental health that they need to be institutionalized, but do need regular help and support. And we need to direct people towards that. So those are the things that we ought to be able to do, because I think we have a major problem with people who are suffering from severe mental illnesses and are clearly, a threat to themselves and others, who are not getting the help that they need. And in some instances, and this is the unpopular part, not being forced to get that help when they should be being forced to get that help. And it's a huge controversy in the state. Actually, there was an advocate on this issue, Frederick DeBoer, who was on a podcast called Blue City Blues that a couple people run here in the city of Seattle that I would urge you to listen to. Frederick DeBoer on Blue City Blues, which talks about involuntary commitment and how to better deal with mental health and how to change those policies. So I'm interested in both those issues, but right now I want to make sure that you're getting the support that you should be getting. Because if this is happening... Yeah.
Can I follow up just real quick? So I'm going to UW, or I was going to UW. I had to drop out because of this. My teacher, I was taking a mental health and addiction class, and they brought up the institutions being closed in the 80s. Do you think that was a mistake?
Yes, I do. Now, if you want to reform how they were run, sure. But we closed all of these institutions with the notion that we're going to do community-based care. And a lot of that community-based care was never built. We didn't have those opportunities, but also in some instances, people are in a situation where community-based care isn't really the solution. Now, I will say,
Right.
clearly, we institutionalized in many instances too many people too easily, too quickly. There wasn't due process. I'm not saying do it without due process, but there was a whole movement in the 80s and 90s towards mainstreaming, towards the idea that everybody should be integrated into society like everybody else. And yes, I think we went too far with that. It was a mistake, and we have a lot of people not getting the help that they need. We have a lot of other people like you and others who have to deal with the challenges that these people present in the community. And it's creating a major problem, certainly not just here in other places in the country, but in the Puget Sound region, it is a huge challenge, in my opinion.
Well, thank you for your answer, sir.
Thanks. I hope we can help you.
All right, just another quick reminder, the Congressman and his staff put out a very informative newsletter. You can get signed up to receive that right now by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. Again, please press *6 to get subscribed to the e-newsletter. Now back out to Bellevue, we've got Sherry joining us now. Hi, Sherry. You are live with Congressman Smith. What's your question?
Hello, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Hello, I am fine, Adam Smith. I would like to know, I know the federal budget deficit is $1.1 trillion. I've listened to you tonight, as I've listened many, many times. I understand your frustrations with the current party in charge, but I would really like to hear you say how you would solve the deficit.
Sure.
You didn't solve it in the last 4 years.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I will say, just from my own record standpoint, when I got elected to Congress, we had a debt and a deficit. I voted for the balanced budget agreement in 1997, and we had 4 straight years of surpluses. So I did support that, and I have spoken out fairly consistently over the decades about it. First of all, I'm going to be honest with you. We are not going to solve the problem in the next 3 or 4 years, or even in the next decade, in terms of getting to a balanced budget.
Decade. Did you just hear decade? Decade?
Yeah.
It's going to take a decade.
Yeah, bear with me for just a moment. What we have to do is we have to get the deficit down. Getting it to zero, I'll be honest with you, at this point would be a shock to the economic system. We can run deficits, we can run debts, but not at the level that we are currently running it at. The overall debt is like $35 trillion, depending on how you calculate it. And the deficit now is sadly above 1.1. I think it's about 1.5, 1.6. So number one, let's not, BS the public here and say that we've got some magic plan to balance the budget tomorrow. But we can bring that down. And we can bring that down, first of all, on the federal level. I think revenue is a major part of the problem. We are not collecting, I think it's somewhere between $200 and $300 billion a year in taxes that are owed that are not being collected because we don't have enough enforcement, because we keep demonizing and downsizing the IRS.
Wait, you said taxes. Stop.
I did.
Taxes. Can you address
Yes.
that?
Yeah, I think I did. I think we should
create the revenue. Create the revenue.
Yeah, I think I did address that, but I have one more point which I'll make. Number one, collect it. Number one, hire the IRS agents, have them go out and collect the taxes that are owed. Don't allow all these loopholes and, ducking that so many people with money tend to do. Number two, like I said, I totally opposed this bill that extended all of these Trump tax cuts from 2017. I dumped them all. All right. The economy was actually doing reasonably well in 2016 and 2017 before we did all these taxes. I'd get rid of all of those taxes. As I mentioned earlier, I would scrap the cap on Social Security and Medicare taxes to better fund those programs. That's number one. Number two, I would not push us to 5% of GDP for the Defense Department. I would keep the Defense Department right around 3%, which would save an enormous amount of money in terms of where this bill next done. Number three, I certainly wouldn't spend another $150 billion on more ICE agents and a border wall. I don't think that is necessary. And number four, and this is actually the most important part, healthcare reform. The single largest portion of our budget goes to health insurance, from Medicare, Medicaid, and also health insurance for federal employees, current and retired. And as I mentioned earlier, we spend twice as much money per capita on healthcare as the next highest country in the world. And consistently, our healthcare results, depending on the category, rank somewhere between 30th and 40th. We aren't getting results. A, because we don't cover everybody. So we've got a lot of uninsured people who are getting healthcare in the most inefficient, wasteful way possible. B, because we do not adequately regulate what healthcare can be given to people. We order tests, we order drugs, we order surgeries because they pay, because the reimbursement rates are there, not because they're in the best interests of the patient. So healthcare reform, I think, is absolutely crucial to getting the debt and the deficit under control. So that's basically how I would approach it. I will admit this would not be politically popular. People want to believe that we can balance the budget without raising taxes or cutting anything that truly hurts. That is not true. We are going to have to make some tough choices to get there, and those are some of the choices that I would make.
All right, our next question comes from Claude in Seattle. Claude, you are live with the congressman. Go ahead, please.
How you doing, Congressman? You know me, and I know you will. Excuse me. I have two questions. One is midterm. How are we looking midterm? Two is we need to do something with the Constitution to create term limit for Supreme Court justices. Can
Yes.
you address those two issues? And
Yes,
I would
absolutely.
like to give my number to your folks so that the brother that was talking about mental health, he can contact me and I can get him with some folks that I know that will be able to address that issue. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. So first of all, I'm going to have to be a little artful on the first one because this is an official call, not a political call. So I can't really talk specifically about the midterms and how we're looking. I will say that, and this is on the policy side, if you have concerns about Donald Trump and the leadership of the current Republican Party, I think the biggest and most important thing that we can do to address those concerns is offer reasonable alternatives. Yes, I've been critical of a number of different Trump policies here, but I think we need to also show that there is a better way to help the working class in our country. That seems to be the central issue. And I think my party has strayed from that in some areas. I think if Democrats are going to make a credible alternative on economic policy and a whole bunch of different other things, we need to get back to the idea of work hard, play by the rules, get ahead. The problem we have in this country is too many people are working hard, playing by the rules, and not getting ahead. I think we need to focus on that mutual responsibility and accountability. Yes, we need a fairer society. We need better laws on taxes and housing and a whole host of other things. But it's also not just about giving out free stuff, saying that housing should be free and transportation should be free and healthcare should be free. We need to deliver a message that appeals to the working class. If you work, we're going to make sure you're better rewarded. I think that includes support for unions, support for the minimum wage, support for overtime pay, support for holding corporations accountable for taking care of their workers. A very populist message that focuses on the working class and economics. And then at the same time, we need to address concerns that people have about the Democratic Party in terms of border security, immigration enforcement, dealing with crime, homelessness, and drug abuse, to introduce an accountability and a responsibility element to it, to show that we have a good, solid plan. I don't think just bashing on Trump is going to be sufficient to be successful at reversing some of his policies. The Supreme Court is a major, major problem. They have become a very partisan body in recent years, and lifetime tenure creates a challenge. Lifetime tenure, and by the way, no ethical restrictions. We've seen this with judges on the Supreme Court getting all kinds of gifts and economic benefits from people and entities that they rule on. It is completely wrong and completely unaccountable. So personally, I would support changing the law to create a 10-year term limit for Supreme Court justices. If you want to then argue that, well, then you can have a retention issue. If you want to reappoint and go through another confirmation process, that's fine. But there should be a 10-year term on our Supreme Court justices and all of our federal judges. They should not be completely unaccountable, which they are now.
Thank you.
All right, and looking at the clock, it looks like we have time for just one more question, and that honor goes to Cade in Seattle. Hello, Cade. You are live. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, Congressman Smith. Thanks for taking the time.
Sure.
So I'm really concerned about our democracy, and I want to get to kitchen table issues. I think everyone does. But I think that the state of our democracy is keeping us from getting to those kitchen table issues. This bill, the spending bill that just passed, was deeply unpopular across the country,
Yes.
and it should never have been passed. That is ridiculous. There are so many things that our Congress is just gone. And I applaud your efforts and the efforts of your colleagues, but we are looking at a government where we basically have two chambers that are gone. And the judiciary is all we have, and everything that they have, all the teeth they have, is being eroded even further by the Supreme Court. I know that we also have this fourth estate, is the media, and I'm concerned about the state of our media and keeping the public informed so that we can hold our government accountable. It really is just a scary state. And I want to ask you about, I know this is a official call and not a political call, but I want to ask you what should the public do in our responsibilities as citizens, because I see our country has become a fascist one. And I'm very scared about the state of our country, and I'm very scared about the future of our country and my future and my family's future. What can we do to, it feels like Germany in 1930s. What can we do to keep from getting to 1940?
Yeah. No, I share your concerns, and I think the facts bear out those concerns. I've laid out some of them during the course of this call right now, but the way ICE is being used to terrorize communities without due process, a whole host of issues in terms of how the president is using the Justice Department, the lawsuits he's filing against the media and against law firms, attacking his political opponents, allowing his political supporters to be completely unaccountable before the law, the whole host of things, and we should be absolutely worried about it. I'll give sort of two separate answers here. The first answer is organized. The No Kings rallies of about a month ago, I think, were remarkably effective. They were all across the country. They gave people a purpose and a focus and a way to speak out on the message, and organize nationally. You can pick an issue. If you're concerned about the immigration enforcement, there are people all across the country who are concerned about it. Find organizations that are organizing around that so that they can get constituents, not just in districts like mine, that are 70% Democratic and expressing their concerns about Trump, but in districts all across the country. Find constituents in red areas of this country so that they can go to their member of Congress and say, this matters to me, it's a problem. So organize in that way. And it's frustrating. I used to have this line that I have amended slightly, given the current time, because I've been in politics a long time, and I have a lot of people who sort of dabble in politics. They don't pay much attention to it, and then something comes up that concerns them, so they get involved. And inevitably, they get frustrated after a month or two that what they're concerned about hasn't been solved. But the nature of representative democracy is it takes time. And I always used to say, you have to be patient and persistent. Well, I amend that slightly now to say you need to be impatient and persistent because the urgency is great. So that means organize, drive the message, try to flip public opinion and get more people on our side to push back against these policies that are so concerning. The second thing is, if you're going to organize successfully, you got to build coalitions. You got to build coalitions and you got to have a message. It is insufficient right now for us to just preach to the choir. There were a whole lot of people who were very concerned about where Trump and the Republicans were going in the last election. Turned out to be about 48.5% of the country. That's great. If we're going to be successful, we have to reach more. And to reach more, we cannot condemn every single person who voted for Trump. We can't. We have to figure out why and try to meet them at least halfway to address concerns that they have. And to do that, I say 3 messages, and I say this all the time. Number 1, make the point you just made. Representative democracy is at stake and you ought to care about it. And here's the way it's playing out. I think one argument that really resonates with people is the federal government coming into our communities and snatching people off the streets, locking them up and detaining them, and in some cases deporting them without due process. That is deeply concerning to people all across the political spectrum. So make the argument that our representative democracy and our rule of law is under threat. Number 1. Number 2, get to those kitchen table issues. Because part of the reason that representative democracy is the best form of government is because it avoids making the types of policies that Trump is making that do hurt you economically. The tariff policies that he's throwing around here are putting people out of business, costing us jobs. The immigration policies are also undermining our economy. The cuts that he's making to programs are making us weaker as a country. The fact that he is alienating every single partner and ally that we've had for the last 80 years is making us more vulnerable as a country. It is impacting your life concretely right now, even beyond the impact it's having on the rule of law and representative democracy. And number 3, I've said before, offer an alternative. People turned on the Democratic Party and that coalition for reasons. And not all of those reasons were irrational or wrong. Listen, grow, learn, address the issues that people have that pushed them in Trump's direction in the first place. You're not going to get everyone. I understand that. I understand there's a hardcore there that we just fundamentally disagree with. But there are a lot of people who you can reach to grow the coalition, to get it to a sufficient size to save our democracy and put our country on a better path. And that's what we ought to be doing. So the best way I can explain it, but I think you did a good job of really making clear what the threat is. And I agree with you that the threat is that profound.
So, Congressman, as we wrap up this call, I'd like to make sure that I give you a few moments for some final thoughts, sir.
Yes, sure. Final thoughts would be where I started. I think that last closing part is some of the most important stuff that I'm working on. The final piece of that would be, where, Trump is not in charge. We need to really focus on governing well, which is I do a lot of work here locally. We've talked about some of the issues around housing, but also dealing with mental health, behavioral health issues, criminal justice issues, workforce development. Govern well, govern efficiently. Very focused on that piece of it. And I'll close where I started. This is an ongoing process. This is incredibly helpful for me to have these conversations. I try to do as many telephone town halls as I can, give people that opportunity. But reach out to me anytime. This is not your only opportunity to tell us what you think we ought to be doing. Call my office. Let us know how we can address issues that are of concern to you. And I thank you all for participating in our conversation this evening.
A hearty thank you to everyone for joining today's telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. If you'd like to stay up to date on the Congressman's work, you can follow him on Facebook, X, and Instagram using the handle @RepAdamSmith. Also check him out on Blue Sky at adamsmith.house.gov. Now, at this point in the call, if you'd like to subscribe to the Congressman's e-newsletter, simply stay on the line and leave us your name and email address after the tone. Thanks again for sharing your time with us this evening. We hope you stay healthy and safe and have a great night. This concludes our event. Goodbye.